Here we're going to show how to deal with missing data, and we're going to pick up with the gig with Excel, the gig Excel worksheet that is within the chapter 2 data sets that we started working with last week. So we're picking up with where we left off. And if you recall, last week we created this table and we were counting how much data was missing, and we looked to see how much data was missing. And oops, let's get rid of that. Okay, and I want to get rid of all this too. Okay, set it all up so we're back where we were. Okay, we have all our data visible, and we noticed that we were missing data in industry and job, and we counted it up, and we said, okay, I showed you how to count the missing using the count blank function. And now today we were talking about how we want to know how much of the data is missing, because we have this kind of rule of thumb that we really don't want to start messing around with more than 5% missing data. And if we have more than 5%, we probably are going to consider that data unusable, that whole data set. So this percent missing is something that we often kind of use and refer to on whether we can proceed with our strategies. So let's just go through how we set up this function, because I think it highlights a few Excel um, things. So obviously, to get the percent missing, we're just going to count the missing. So I'm going to create a little function here by putting the equal sign and then using my arrow keys to select the cell. So I selected the cell that tells me how many um, are missing records in the column industry, which are 10. And I'm going to divide that by the total number of columns to give me the percent missing. So it's not this 594, it's actually this 604 that gives me that. So I'm going to hit enter. Now I want to copy this formula over to jobs because I had 16 records missing in job, and I just want to highlight how we can reuse formulas once we create them. So this formula gives me this 2%. Actually, on your computer, it may not look that way. It may look like that, which is how I intended it to start out. Sorry, I was working on this prior to making the recording. Okay, and then what I want to show you is if I click up here on the formula uh, space up here, or formula bar, you can see it highlights in color what's included in the formula. Now, when I copy this over, I want it to automatically change the D to an E because I want to do the percent missing for column E, which is job. But I still want to divide by B609. So I want B609 to be an absolute reference. And to do that, on my keyboard, it's function F4. And as I hit function F4, it toggles through all the options of where to put the dollar sign. The dollar sign freezes whatever it's in front of. So right now, nothing's frozen. And if I have the dollar sign in both the column and row, I am freezing that column and row when I copy this formula. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to copy this formula. And I like Control C, Control V because it keeps my finger on the keyboard and I can go faster. So I've now copied over the percent missing. These numbers are long decimals, and usually we prefer to see them as percent. So I'm going to select both of those cells and come up here and hit percent. And it will automatically give me percent to no decimals, and I can format that with these format buttons up here in the number grouping under the Home tab. So I see that both of these are 2% and 3%, so we are within the 5%. We're okay to remove the blanks, the missing records. So I want to create a subset of this data that's going to only have full, complete records. So I go up here, we've created these filters when we made this a table. They were added in automatically. If you don't create a table, you can go to the Data tab and turn filters on and off with this filter button right here. Table format will automatically include them always. All right, so I'm going to come up here to the drop-down filter that I'm talking about, and I see all the unique entries in this column, and I'm going to unclick blanks because I don't want the blanks anymore. Now, if I scroll down and like look at industry, there are now no more missing or blank industry rows. And then I come over here to job and I can do the same thing. So I'm going to come down to the bottom one and uncheck blanks. And that will bring me down. So now as I scroll down, I can see that what I am visually seeing is 586, right? Because the row 1 is the headers, variable names. So I have 586 records, but if you notice, nothing changed down here. And that's because Excel is really only hiding. It goes from 587 to 607. Those rows, they're still there. If I want to use this data set, I can't use this worksheet because it's got that data still there, which is great. I don't actually ever want to get rid of missing data. I want to create new clean data. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select what I can see. And I'm going to do that by selecting the bottom right corner since I'm already down here. And I'm going to scroll up to the top left corner. I'm basically going to make a big rectangle around my data. So hit Shift click. Now I have all of this data and I want to copy it. So I'm going to hit Control C. And I'm going to come down here and I can click the New Sheet button because I have a little plus. If you have too many worksheets, you're not going to see that. And then you're going to have to right click and hit insert at the very top, and you're going to have a choice. And I'm going to click the very first one that's chosen for me is the worksheet. So I'll say OK. It's going to add this new sheet. And here I'm going to right click and just hit paste. So now I've got a new set of data. It is not a table any longer. It is now just a data range, subset of the data. And if I scroll down, I can see at the very bottom of all this data range that I only go to row 579. So I did now exclude the missing data. So that's how you make a subset by removing missing or blank entries. One other thing I wanted to show you, which is how to quickly get these columns the width you would like, so they're not all squished together. So I just selected all those 4 columns. I'm going to go in the Home tab over to the Format, the Cells group, and on Format I'm going to scroll down, pick the drop down and come down to Autofit column width. So now I can see all my entries. It'll make it as wide, just as wide as needed. I can certainly select multiple columns, let's say, and also this will change their width. All the ones that are selected will be changed by the same amount, so I can make my widths bigger, like that. Okay. So the next thing we were going to talk about was an example on imputation. So that was an omission. That was the omission strategy where we just flat out remove rows of data when there's anything missing in them. Now we're going to talk about imputation. And imputation, mean imputation, is what we do. Again, if we have less than 5% of the data missing and if we don't have any outliers in our data. If not, we would use median imputation. So for this, the example is going to be the data set called restaurant reviews in our chapter 2 data. So again, to find that, you right click on this little arrow in the lower left corner, and that brings up all the worksheets in the data set. So we're going to scroll down to restaurant reviews. It's going to jump us over there, and we see that we have this data. And this data is survey data on restaurants on a scale of 1 to 7. Okay, so since, if you notice what it did, it defaulted to what the row formatting is. It put it right in the middle, or actually this is sorry, take it back, right justified, align right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change all these to align left. And I'm going to take the top row in this data and just quickly turn it into something that's easier to visually work with. I'm going to also go up here to view, and I'm going to go to freeze panes because I want to freeze the top row because I know my data extends below a whole monitor's worth of data. Okay, so once again, we want to consider doing a mean imputation. What we're going to need to know about this data is whether or not there are outliers. So the first thing let's do is go ahead and add our filters to this data. So I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I'm going to just hit this Filter button. And what this Filter button now is going to allow me to do is to sort the data easily. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to sort one column at a time. So I'm going to sort smallest to largest on ambiance. So I see I go from a 3 to a 6, and then there's a missing ambiance. So I see that this is within the scale of 1 to 7. I'm not seeing anything wrong or crazy there. So I'm going to show you now another way to check. So that's one way you can check, and sorting is really important. I recommend you do it. Another way to check, if you don't have, if this is only numbers 1 to 7, so this is not possible if I had something like weight or height or income where you had, many, maybe thousands of entries that are each unique. But when I look at something like only 1 to 7, which is actually a categorical, it's an ordinal scale, categorical variable, right? I can see that it makes sense. They're all just 4, 6, 5, 6, and 7. Everything looks okay there. I'm going to check service, same thing there. And I'm going to check food, same thing there. So all of these look like candidates for doing a mean imputation. I'm going to use the mean of these scale values to be what I'm going to guess the missing value is. Okay, so I can go up here to column C. I'm going to right click and insert a column because I want to create a new variable. Instead of ambiance, it's going to be the imputed ambiance. And I want to use the mean. I'm going to do a mean imputation. Now you could argue, well, is that really what you want to do? And I think for most things that we would do statistically or analytically with this data, even though it is ordinal scale, we would be possibly interested in looking at things like the mean of it. So let's go ahead and get averages. So average. And we're going to use the function average, which you can, oops. So we're going to need the average for each of these columns of data. So to get that, we're going to use the function average, which will skip over blanks. So I'm going to pick the average, and I'm going to go ahead and choose this first cell, even though it's blank, because I want to copy this formula and use it. So I'm going to pick the bottom cell, go up to the top, and then hit shift click, and now in the closing parentheses will give me the average of all these cells. Now what I can do, I'm going to need the average for the other columns of data too, so I'm going to copy this over here. Okay. Usually we would like the average to only have one more decimal than our raw data. So actually what I would like to use is this as follows, but when I copy it, oops, one more decimal than the raw data. Is unfortunately when I copy it over, it's actually going to keep and remember the full decimals, but that's okay. We'll have to individually format it. Now if we come up here, I want to show you how I'm going to build this formula to do a mean imputation because I never want to overwrite my data. I want to create a new variable. So what I'm going to say is if, and if is a logical test, and if we wanted to, we could fill it out with the GUI face. And we could say is blank. Oops. And I think that the problem with doing it with the GUI interface is it's not going to give it to me in capitals. I'm not sure if it's going to recognize it unless it's all caps as a function. What I want to know is if the entry in this row for ambiance is blank. And it seems like it's reading it because it says false. So that's the nice thing about this little GUI interface. It will sometimes give you a readout as you go. So if the value is true, if it is blank, what I actually want is to put the, scroll down and find that mean, that average. So I'm going to do a mean imputation. And then if it's false, I'm going to keep what was there. So I keep B2. Okay. Now, I see that that worked, and I'm going to double click on that. And I see that it appears to have worked fine. So it was able to do a mean imputation there. Oh, no, it wasn't. Right? Every single time it was changing this mean. So if you notice this is wrong, this is a mean 0 because there's nothing down here. So a very common error is we want to copy this formula, but we actually want this mean to be frozen. We don't want it, we want an absolute reference to that cell. So for this one, I'm going to hit function F4, but I know I want to copy it over for cleanliness and service. So I want the column to change. I just don't want that row to change. So I'm going to hit enter, and now I'm going to double click this formula. Now I see I did fill the missing value with the mean. And again, I can go ahead down to 1 decimal there. Now I would like to reuse that formula, so I'm going to now create an imputed column for cleanliness. So I do the same thing again. I'm going to insert another column to the right of cleanliness, and I'm going to call it impute clean. And I want to copy the formula I already worked with. So let's come over, get that formula. We're going to copy it over here. And we're going to just check to see if it's doing what we hope it's doing. So I click up on the formula bar, and it's going to highlight the cells that are in the formula. So it's saying, okay, if cell D2 is missing, then I'm going to put instead the mean. Right? This is what it does if it's true. So let's come down here. Get that mean is a 5.5 in D153. It highlights it in red. It is what I wanted to do when the data is missing, right? So if it's blank, this is what I do. If it's not blank, then I just want to keep the data. So over here, we're going to click on this lower arrow. It's going to copy the formula down. It's going to be doing a different cell as we copy. You notice it's changing the row, keeping the column. And as we come down, we see that the missing did, in fact, pull in the mean, the cleanliness scale of results. All right, so again, we can continue to do this now. We're going to need to do it for service and food because we had missing data in both of those, right? We had seen that we had missing data. One way to know that we have missing data, it was with the drop downs, right? So we said we had blanks in both of those, food and service. So let's go ahead and repeat what we just did by inserting a column to the right of service, and we're going to call it imputed SV. I'm going to call it imputed SVC, imputed service. And I'm going to take the formula I used and copy it over. I see that it did adjust the columns to F, which is what I need, and it hopefully is picking up that mean imputation for the blanks, and it is. So I see it's highlighted in red. So that's doing everything I want it to do. And I'm going to double click that lower right little green mini square, and it is filling in everything with that mean imputation. And finally, I'm going to impute food. Doing the same thing again. Notice this is outside of what was formatted, so it's not seeing to format it um, that uh, same formatting. Another thing I could do is right click and copy this whole formula over. So copy that whole column over, change just the label, and then confirm by clicking on the formula bar that my formula did automatically adjust the way I thought I had set it up to do. So it did, and that is all looking good now. Okay, so now the only thing that I would maybe want to do is come through and um, change the formatting on this to be just 1 decimal. And notice I had to click that a bunch of times, and I don't feel like doing that for every one of these. So I'm just going to choose the cell, right click, choose this little paintbrush, which is the format painter. And then I just have to do that every time. And I'm just kind of copying this formatting over to everywhere where I'm seeing a bunch of decimals I don't want. Okay, so now I've created these columns of imputed data. They've removed the missing blanks and now replaced them with the means. And I want to use this data set going forward. So one thing I could do is make a subset of this that doesn't have all these old columns that have dirty, what I would call dirty data, because that's missing data. So I want to create a new worksheet, and I want to make it right next to this one. So I'm going to right click and hit insert a worksheet, and it's called sheet 1. So let's rename it so we know what we're talking about. We're going to call it clean dat for the restaurant review. So I just put it clean dat RR. And what I'm going to do is come over to copy over from cell A1. I'm going to come down to, I clicked on A1 and now I'm coming down. I can use my scroll bar. I'm going to come down to I-151. I hit shift click so I select all these cells. And I'm going to copy them over. I hit control C, but the key thing that's really important is when I come over here, I want to paste just the values. So I want just the numbers. So I've now gotten rid of all my formulas in my data. Oh, look what it did. It changed those back again. Yeah, that's one thing Excel does that's annoying. But okay, we'll deal with that later. Anyway, you can go back and fix that. What I did want to tell you though is let's make these columns fit the titles of what they are. Is we have these dirty columns. Ambiance, for example, was one. And if you notice, the formulas are gone. So now when I delete this entire column, it's not going to mess up anything over here in the imputed ambiance. If I had done that while the formula was in there, so let me go back up here and I'm going to go back to the restaurant review worksheet and just show you what happens if you have formulas and you delete, you get this problem where it says, wait, error, reference missing. So I'm going to use the undo key here because I didn't really want that, right? That was my build. This is where I did my work to create the clean data. Now, cleanliness had missing values. So did service and so did food. So I'm hitting control and clicking on each of those columns. So that's a way to kind of have columns where there's kind of spaces in between them. I'm going to right click and hit delete. So I was able to delete all of those columns with one step. Okay. So here we see now that in the clean data set that we can now take forward as our analysis data set for whatever we want to do with this. And one option also would be we could round these if we want to say, well, instead of doing the mean to 1 decimal, because these were scaled data, we could go ahead and round these values. So we could go here. I'm just selecting all the data, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to hit this as a number, and then I'm going to format this number. So I have to go down to more number formats, and I'm going to go to the decimal places and down 0. I hit OK. So now I have my missing data has now been formatted to a whole number. So whatever is the closest whole number. Okay. Now the next thing we want to talk about is how do we do this imputation for categoricals. And for that, we're going to look at the data set that is in here as exercise 219 data. And I'm not exactly sure what all the variables here are representing, but I believe they're related to homes and whether people are owning or renting their home. So it's an example of where we see a categorical variable that has a missing data in it. So we're going to impute in here a category called unknown. So to do that, I'm going to again create another column. It's going to be imputed x. I'm going to call it imputed x2. And here I'm just going to say, I'm going to use that same structure. I'm going to say if, and then is blank. So again, if you prefer, we can work with the, we can work with the function button directly. So notice I haven't typed anything yet, so I didn't know what to do. So I can go in here and I can just type in if, because if is one of the ones we would maybe want to be like, I'm going to not find it right away. Okay, maybe it's not the best way to do this. Let me cancel. Let me show you a better way to do it. So let's say we're like, oh, you know I recently used it. So let's go to formulas and look at recently used. And why is it not finding? That's so weird. But we'll just go to logical and go to if. Okay, so now we got it. Okay. Is blank is going to be our test. We want to know if the cell is blank in X2. And if it is blank, we're going to say unknown. Okay. And if it's false, then we're just going to go ahead and put in, I got this GUI up, I've got little vertical black line blinking, and I can actually come over to the cell B2 and click on it, and it's going to fill it in for me. And I can say OK. So notice it did automatically make everything capital, because that's how Excel does functions with all caps. So that's good, it did that. So that seems to be working. I'm going to click that little button right there and double click that little square. It's going to autofill the formula all the way down. And it did work. I have unknown in for many of the where there was a missing component. And next time we'll talk about in class, we're going to be talking about how to instead fill this with the mode or the most frequent entry.